In terms of predictors of fitness, these are the three main predictors that tell you how fit you as a person are. We've already covered the first two in terms of what does that mean. The aerobic capacity was that VO2 max. Very, very good predictor of endurance performance. What else do I want to say about that? I think we've already covered most of it. The same with lactate threshold. That's another very good predictor of how good your performance is going to be is what is your lactate threshold, that period or that place where you transition from the aerobic to the anaerobic zone. Economy is something that essentially is a measure of how little oxygen you use per minute in your activity. So if you're able to go at a certain pace using less oxygen per minute than somebody else could go at that pace, you're more economical. Okay, you're able to, go just like a car that can have a higher, mile per hour rating. That you're more economical as an athlete. Economy to a large extent is also hereditary. You're kind of born with it or you're not. Take an example, Michael Phelps. Okay, Michael Phelps his body was born to swim. I mean, he just was, economically structured so that swimming was very easy for him relative to other people. So just like, you can come up with all kinds of different examples in sports where somebody is built for that particular sport in some way. When you look at some of these VO2 maxes, somebody with a 97.5 VO2 max was born to be an aerobic athlete. That's just a fact. But economy, to some extent, you can work on to try to improve, even if you don't hereditarily have a good economy to start. One of the ways that you can improve it is reducing body weight, excess body weight. The more weight you carry, the less economical you are because you're having to move that over a certain, elevation gain or mileage. Another way that you can improve economy, especially in sports that involve a lot of technique, is to improve your efficiency in how you move. One of my sports, cross-country skiing, you can really improve economy in this sport through technique. The really interesting thing that they've found is that in general, well, not in general, for all cases, they have never found an athlete that has both a great VO2 max and a great economy. And they've studied many, many elite athletes and have never found that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But these are just predictors, and people are still able to, if you aren't born with a great VO2 max or you aren't born with a great economy, are still able to, become very, very fit athletes and very competitive at their sports. There are only 3 things that you can affect in a training program: frequency, duration, and intensity. Frequency, if you train not often enough, then you'll end up probably getting, not very good performance. Duration, if you don't train long enough for a certain period, likewise, you don't end up getting the right performance benefits that you would like to see. And then the third one, intensity. If you don't train hard enough, you'll likewise not get the performance enhancements that you're hoping for. So it's a balance between all 3 of these things. You got to get long enough, hard enough, and frequent enough in order to get what you want and, in terms of your benefits back. One thing I'd like to say on that I hadn't brought up earlier about this frequency, duration, and intensity. One of the things that I see quite often in people that on trips that I've led, etc., is people's training programs. When I talked about having the stress and then the recovery, they tend not to have one or the other. They tend to only have one or the other, not both. For example, I'm sure a lot of you might know people that go out and every single day they do the incline. Nothing else. Every day, the incline. Or bar trail. Every day, run up bar trail. Always going the same distance, the same speed, and never having recovery in between. Then on the other hand, I see a lot of times people on my trips that are going slow, and they often make this excuse, well, that's the way I've always been. I'm just kind of slow. And when I ask them, what kind of training program do you have? Do you ever go fast? Do you ever do any speed work in your training? No? Okay. That's why. You have to have this stress and then recovery. If you never have the stress, your body just says, okay, I'm slow. I'm going to stay slow. If you never have the recovery, then you never have the chance to build stronger from all the stress that you're giving it. So it's really important to balance all of this if you really want to improve your fitness. There's common ways of, how would I call this? Ways of measuring the intensity, the duration, etc. of your training. One of them is through aerobic zones. Another one that is very similar, they call it levels. So you'll have level 1 through 5. This is zone 1 through 5. Essentially, this is a way of saying, this is how hard I'm going when I go out and to do whatever kind of training I'm going to do. So if you look at these 5 zones, the first level is still going at you're still getting your heart rate up to that half throttle I talked to you about. So the zones would be, zone 1 would be essentially half throttle. Zone 5 would be full throttle. And then all your zones in between are some increment between that half throttle and the full throttle. So if you look at zone 1, that's fairly easy. You're still getting that heart rate up. You're still going that half throttle, but you're not, you're comfortable enough to where you could easily sing your favorite song as you're out there doing whatever you're doing, okay? This zone is often used for recovery. So just because we talk about recovery and rest doesn't mean you have to be sitting on the couch eating a pizza. Sometimes that's a good thing too, but you can also have what we call active recovery, where today I'm not going to worry about training, but I still want to get out and move. I want to get out and hike casually up a trail, look at things, not beat myself silly. That's still a very good form of recovery in between a stressful training session. This is also good for a good area for doing a warm-up to get ready to do a stressful training. And it's also a good area to do your cool down so that you can, get everything back down to normal and flush all the things out of your muscles before you stop. It's also a good area to build up capillaries. So your body will still respond in this level of training by building capillaries to get all the blood, etc., through your muscles. And then if you look at each one, I've defined them in terms of level of effort. So zone 2, now you can hold a long conversation. You may not be able to sing your favorite song, but you can still gab quite a bit. Zone 3, now you're getting down to talking in short sentences. And zone 4, you don't really want to talk. And then zone 5, all you want to do is survive. Okay? So that gives you an idea based on level of effort. And this shows you the different things that you can gain through that type of training. When we talked about VO2 max, which is the aerobic capacity, how much oxygen can you process, you'll see that you're only going to be able to get improvements in that VO2 max by stressing your body to breathing really hard. Okay? I can't sit around or do easy, sing favorite songs and get that stress to where I'm going to get my body to try to improve moving that oxygen through. So in order to get the benefits of some of these things requires a little bit of pain.
I have a question before you move.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you stay in each zone?
That's a good question. We'll get to that. Yeah.
I was going to say, this might be something you'll cover later, but for interval training, which 2 zones are you usually moving between?
I'm getting into that too.
Okay.
That's fine.
How do you measure VO2 max? Is it just a blood test, or is there any way to do it for like
There's
average?
only one way that you can measure VO2 max, and essentially it's in a controlled environment where in my case, they put me on a treadmill. No, I was on the cycle. Anyway, you're on a stationary device of some sort, and then they put a mask over your and then essentially beat yourself silly until they've measured the highest amount that you. Yeah, that's really the only way.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about that some more too. Okay. So how do you measure your level of effort? I showed you one way by feel. A lot of times feel can be inaccurate. A lot of times feel can be really dependent upon how you feel that day. I mean, if you're just bursting with energy, okay, you can end up going out on a training session and think, oh, I'm just running so easy. I'm doing my activities so easy. And then you find out you're really not if you have a more objective way of measuring it. Likewise, if you've had a day before where you were really, really trained hard and now today you're kind of tired, you may think that you're really working hard, but you're not. So a lot of times feel is not a very good method. Sometimes it is though, and I'll be talking about that as well. A more honest approach is usually to look at your heart rate, because most of the time your heart rate isn't, it's very objective. And so even if you're feeling great and gung-ho and you look down in your heart rate monitor and you go, whoa, I'm going a lot harder than I thought I was, this is a better way of measuring. The reason why it's important to measure is that you want to, again, stress your body, but then you want to allow it to recover. And so the days that you go out that you might want to do your active recovery day, you want to make sure you don't overdo it so that you're not recovering. Likewise, if you're trying to elevate your VO2 max, it doesn't do you any good if you're not doing the stress that you need to trigger that response of your body to improve your VO2 max. So heart rate monitor is one way of doing that. You talked about measuring VO2 max. I went over that. You can also measure your lactate threshold. There's different ways of measuring lactate threshold, fortunately. Let's see. I think. Let me get to that when I get to this chart coming up. Okay. I briefly touched on this with the resting heart rate before. For those out of shape, could be 70 to 80. These are just statistics. A friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who excellent climber, who reached 250 feet below Everest, and only had to turn back because a person in her party was ill. Her resting heart rate was 80. Strong climber, but she's not in the bell-shaped curve. Okay, so don't think that just because you have a high resting heart rate means there's something wrong with you. So this is just based on averages of people. And then, as I said before, your resting heart rate can descend by 1 beat per week with an effective training program, especially if you started out, not quite as fit as a lot of your peers. Resting heart rate is also a good predictor of problems, because if your resting heart rate is elevated by 8 beats or more, it can be a warning sign. For one, you might be coming down with an illness, and that may not be a good day to go out there and try to do a really hard training program. It may be that you're not recovering sufficiently, so you're not allowing your body to recover to where it should be. Overtraining. This is a problem with a lot of very motivated athletes, because they want to go out there and go hard and hard and hard, and they don't allow enough recovery, and you can dig yourself into such a hole that it'll take you months to recover. So that's also a predictor of a problem. Another one's dehydration, can also cause an elevated resting heart rate. Measuring your max heart rate, because the max heart rate is something that's used a lot in like those level 1 or zone 1 training areas. Max heart rate is used to kind of gauge, what area you can be in those zones. How do you measure your max heart rate? Your max heart rate is something you're born with, and it does decrease somewhat with age, but it doesn't decrease that much if you have a very consistent, good training program. So you see a lot of these formulas, like this one, which is 205 minus half your age, and you'll see bunches of other formulas. This is great if you're in that bell-shaped curve of all the population that they're taking those numbers from. But they're talking about people that sit on the couch, all lumped in there. Okay? So if you're wanting to know how you stand in terms of a maximum heart rate and you're a fairly fit individual, the only way that these formulas work is if you have a population statistics base that consists of fit people. So this is not a very accurate thing for measuring your max heart rate if you're at all fit. The next best thing is a treadmill test, very similar to the VO2 max test, and they essentially stick you on a treadmill or a cycle or whatever it is that you're doing in your sport. Your max heart rate does vary some from sport to sport. Same with lactate threshold. It varies a little bit from sport to sport, but for all intents and purposes, it's not that important unless you're really competing at the high level. The treadmill test, essentially, they, put you on there and beat you silly until you collapse, and that's your max heart rate when that happens. And then you can do it yourself. and that you can do it with yourself if you can get motivated enough. It probably would be better if you at least did it with a friend, especially one that you feel somewhat competitive with. The good news about a max heart rate test is that once you do it, you probably never have to do it again, okay? So you've got it pretty much for forever. But essentially, if you find a hill that's like 700 feet to 1,000 feet in distance, okay, fairly steep hill, what you do is, and only do these tests when you're very, very rested. You want to be really just jumping out of your skin, because if you're at all fatigued, then you're not going to be able to push yourself to the part where you really have a maximum heart rate. Your max heart rate essentially is the limiting factor of how fast your heart can beat based on who you are. Women tend to have a resting heart rate of about 5 beats higher than men in general. So go when you're really, really, feeling good, and then do a good warm-up before you do this test. The warm-up should start off in that lower level where you can sing songs for about 10 minutes, and then go another 10 minutes where you're starting to get, your heart rate up higher to where it's becoming a little bit more of an effort before you start this test. The test is essentially repeats of this hill 5 times. The first time, however you want to go up that hill, hiking fast, running, whatever, you go up that hill to where you start to get your heart rate going up. You get to the top, you turn around, you run back down. Go back up the second time, trying to get it up higher, until eventually you get to the 5th interval, and about 300 feet from the top, you gun it as hard as you can possibly go, until by the time you get to the top, you're just gasping and dying and whatever. And somewhere, if you're wearing a heart rate monitor that measures as you're going, somewhere in there should be your max heart rate if you're giving it all you can. So that's one way you can do it yourself. Pardon?
And you're capable of reading it at the same time.
Yeah. No, you don't need to, because your heart rate monitor records it.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
So, so you can collapse there, and you could actually die, and somebody else could go, "Wow, his max heart rate was..." No.
Is that the moment your heart bursts, or is that
Well, that is kind of one of the fun things about wearing a heart rate monitor, because I've been in some races where you look down at your heart rate and go, "Oh my God, I'm going to die." All right. So rather than using the perceived effort, you can measure your level of effort through your percentages of your max heart rate. So in zone 1, instead of just singing a tune, you're going to be somewhere between 55 and 65% of your max heart rate, until you get all the way down to zone 5, and you can see how much that hurts. Hurts a lot. Now, in these zone levels, you can see that there's recommended areas for fitness based on mountaineering, for example, where zone 2 is really vital for building a good endurance base. So when I talked about those periodization, where you back up from where you've got your goal and you back up your calendar, at the very beginning of your training program, you want to make sure you have a good base, a good solid endurance base, before you start building with some of these more stressful types of training. So zone 2 here is a very good area to stay in to do that kind of training. Also very good for just general mountaineering, where you're doing long approaches, to have that really solid endurance base. Zone 3 is an area that when I talked about, going up and doing the incline, let's say, that's an area that a lot of people tend to stay in too much. So, you want to balance your training for the most part to where you would stay only in those high zones for limited periods of time. Because otherwise you end up, stressing your body too much overall and never allowing recovery. And I'll go into that again some more here in a little bit. Here's where you gain, again, all of your real aerobic benefits by pushing into those higher zones. So measuring lactate threshold, that's an easy thing to do in the lab. Still hurts to have it happen, but this shows you a chart essentially of, here what they're doing is measuring how much lactate is in your system. And this chart is measuring what your heart rate is at that point of those measurements. And so here you have how many essentially millimoles or whatever of lactate. And you can see starting out on this test, essentially they're doing it running. They start out at this level when their heart rate is somewhere in the 130s area. Why are they measuring lactate? They call it a lactate threshold because as you're starting to transition out of that aerobic zone, what you're doing is you're, in order for your body to provide energy as you increase your intensity of your exercise, you're burning that, you're essentially metabolizing that glycogen, that glucose in your blood. And in the process of that metabolism, you produce lactic acid. Now, lactic acid by itself, it sounds bad, by itself is not a bad thing, because lactic acid is what's going out into your bloodstream that's going to be used to break down in terms of energy. But as you start exercising more and more and things become more intense, that lactic acid starts to seep out of your muscles into the bloodstream like it should to provide the energy it needs to. But in the process, when it's seeping out, it breaks down into two components. One of them is lactate, and the other is hydrogen ions. Well, as you're more and more intense in the exercise, you produce more and more of those hydrogen ions, and your blood becomes acidic. And the muscle's environment becomes acidic. And it's that acidity that causes that burning sensation in your muscles and that gasping of breath that you get. And so when your body can't keep up with how much, can't remove that quick enough, then you start to get that burning sensation, and eventually your muscles, don't function properly anymore. And so in order to measure that transition period where you no longer can function properly, they measure the lactate that's in your blood. So if you see here, this person's going along, they're going along, starting to get a little increase, but then suddenly it starts to really spike, okay? This is where your body can no longer flush out or keep up with all of those hydrogen ions. And so this big jump period corresponds to the heart rate here, which is around 169, and that would be that person's lactate threshold. So that's how you would measure it. Essentially in the lab, you'd be running along on the treadmill, and every few minutes they stop you and prick your finger and take a sample, and they keep pushing you and whipping you into a frenzy until they get to that point where and then you're done. Anything else on this one? No. And we're going to get back to this some more, but I just wanted to transition a little. What time did you want to break usually? 7:30?
Whatever works for you.
Yeah, let's do this one, and then we'll stop. So we've been talking all this time about aerobic fitness. Now I want to talk about the other level. We had the three main types of fitness for mountaineering was aerobic, the strength, and then the recovery. So I'm going to briefly go into some of the strength. One of the big lies in strength training for mountaineering is all I need to do is climb. Same as you hear for aerobic training. No matter what the sport that you practice, if you only do that sport, it results in imbalances, in muscle imbalances that will cause all kinds of havoc later on. One of the reasons that you want to do cross training, so to speak, is try to essentially balance a lot of the muscles that you're using. And one of the ways that you can do that is in strength training. For example, a lot of times runners in particular get IT band issues. And cyclists, they also have their issues. If all you're doing is one type of sport and you're only strengthening one types of muscles, the other ones get weak, and then you get things all pulled out of whack. And a lot of times you can get joint, issues because, for example, if your knees, these muscles are strong on the outside, but these are weak on the inside, then they kind of get pulled one way, and then pretty soon your, joints aren't tracking properly, etc. So it's really important not only for your sport to become stronger in your sport, but also to do some strength training to keep these imbalances from occurring. The best way to do strength training in your sport in general is to do strength exercises that are specific to your sport, as well as exercises that are not specific to your sport. And the good news is, with just 45 minutes to 90 minutes, you can exercise virtually every muscle in your body. So it's not a very time, intensive type thing. Also, when we talk about recovery, let's say that I'm going out and I'm doing fitness training for VO2 max enhancement, okay? Well, that day is a very intense exercise day for that type of training. But the next day, when I'm recovering from that intense training, I can still do some strength training that's allowing my aerobic system to recover, but yet I'm still getting some training in for my muscle, my strength. So that's ways that you can balance your training where you can use strength training kind of as an active recovery day for your aerobic training. What are the advantages of strength training? Well, you perform more efficiently. I gave you the example of core strength. That is so important. I remember years ago, when I was a young thing, going out and backpacking for a week. And I hadn't backpacked, in ages, and go out for a week backpacking, and the first couple of days, man, my shoulders were killing me, my hips were killing me. What's going on? And then later on in life, I started inducing core training into my fitness program. And now I don't have to backpack at all. And I can go right out and do a week backpack trip and don't have anywhere near all of those issues. And that's because what happens is when this is weak, then eventually you're doing this. And then all the weights going onto the shoulders and onto the hips, you know, instead of having the whole core body be the foundation to hold that pack. And so this is so important. The other advantages are reduce injuries because of imbalances, help you lose weight. I like all these help you lose weight. 1 pound of fat burns 3 calories a day. 1 pound of muscle burns 30 to 50 calories a day. And when you're aerobically exercising, you're burning a lot of calories. But as soon as you stop, pretty much that calorie burn stops with it. Muscle burns all night long while you're sleeping. So it's just amazing how much, you know, just having that, you know, extra muscle and replacement of fat can really increase your ability to lose weight and keep it off. A really good example of that was Milo of Croton in 540 BC. He won 5 Olympic championships in wrestling. And his way of training was to start with a newborn baby ox and pick up the baby ox every day until the ox was full grown. And then purportedly he ate it all in one day. But that was essentially this progressive type of strength training that allowed him to win 5 gold medals. So just like we had in aerobic training, you have frequency, duration, and intensity. Intensity is how much weight or how much resistance are you working against. Then you've got the duration, how long are you doing it? And then you've got the frequency, how often are you doing it? And weight training, or strength training can be done in a lot of different ways. You don't have to use weights. Weights are kind of nice to have just because, you know, it's easy to have those at home. You don't have to go to a gym necessarily. Bands are a great way of doing strength training. These, what do you call them? The balls, the little handles on them. Yeah, I've got one of those at home, but I've got one that you can put water in it, so you can make them all different weights. So as you go, as you get stronger and stronger, you can add more water to it, which is kind of nice. Another way is your own body strength. I really like to do a lot of my own body strength types of exercises. P90X is I'm really fond of that because I can easily do it at home. One of the things that I'll talk about later is I'm really a big yoga fan, and I do Ashtanga yoga or power yoga, which does a lot of strength training as well as flexibility, so you can kind of get it all together. So there's many different ways you can do it. All are very good. How often should you do it? Well, it depends on how much climbing you're doing, because the last thing you want to do is get really sore and then have to go out and do something where you really need your muscles to work. But it's essentially, if you don't do at least 1 to 2 days a week, you're not going to be able to maintain your muscles. So you at least have to get something in a couple of times, 1 or 2 times a week. Those just starting a strength training program really should try to do at least 3 days a week, with a day of rest in between. That's the other thing. A lot of times when I do strength training, in order to have that recovery period, because right now I'm really sore back here from some leg training I was doing yesterday. So in between, I can do abs or some other, some other to let this rest while I, stress some other aspect. And then 2 days is a bare minimum if you want to make any gains in strength. And last little bit of strength training. Intensity. So essentially, there's two trains of thought on terms of how much weight or how much resistance that you should have, depending on whether you're an endurance athlete or more of a strength athlete. The one train of thought is that if you're an endurance athlete, the idea is to have less weight, more reps, okay? So you would have a lot more repetitions in your workout, but lighter weights. For a strength person, a lot of times it's just the opposite. You go with less reps, but more weight. Just in general, I usually like to go 8 to 12-ish. Sometimes I'll go up to 16 reps. But in general, I like to go, using a certain weight to start or a certain resistance to start, and then work up. As I get to where those feel easy, then I start to work up in my resistance. I try to go with the training for the most part to complement my sports. So if I'm getting ready, like I am right now, for cross-country ski racing this winter, I try to focus right now on very specific strengths that'll help me in my skiing. The one main principle in terms of intensity, though, is that no matter whether you're doing the lighter weights, more reps, or more weights and less reps, is that you should always have on the last three reps reaching the point to where you feel like you can't do any more. So if you're not getting to that point, whether it be the lighter or the heavier weights, then you should add more resistance to your reps. Volume. This is something when you're looking at time. When you're trying to really make it to where your time is being handled efficiently as possible, 60% of the benefits that you're going to get from weight training come on the first set of training. They recommend that you do 3 sets in general. The second set, you get 20% of the benefits, and on the third set you get 10%. So if you're really limited in time, it's better to get all of the different muscle groups one set. At least you get 60% of the benefits there versus doing just a couple of different muscle groups, all 3. So that's one way that you can efficiently manage your time better if you just can't seem to get all of that in.